I want you to think about that manager you had that would constantly check in on you, that would ask questions about the progress of work. And it kind of got a little stressful at times because they always wanted an update. But it was just because they knew what they were doing. It was just because they wanted to support you. Well, turns out one of the key symptoms of imposter syndrome in leaders is micromanagement. Hello, welcome to the Head of the Table. I'm Nora Riddle, and I'm a former policy advisor, former chief of staff in corporate America, and your advisor on how to become the best leader that you can be. Whether you're a current leader or aspiring leader, this podcast talks all about the issues facing leadership from both the perspective of leadership and from working professionals. I'm so glad that you're here today. We're on episode 4. I can't believe that we're already on episode 4. Today, I'm all cozy in a sweatshirt. I have a nice vanilla latte with me, and I'm really hoping that will bring on some fall weather. Here in DC, we're kind of up and down with weather, so it's still getting up into the mid and high 80s, but maybe this will manifest some fall weather. I'm so excited to have you here today at the Head of the Table. We're going to be discussing imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, I feel like, has really become one of those fuzzwords. Again, bringing that back up. A fuzzword is kind of a buzzword, something super catchy that's kind of lost some meaning or just kind of is brought up all of the time. I really want us to spend some time digging into what is imposter syndrome, how could this be impacting you, both you and your team, those you manage, and also kind of looking into what are the tips and tricks to overcoming imposter syndrome and how having imposter syndrome could actually be making you a better leader. I wanted to start out the episode by defining imposter syndrome. I think it's really helpful when we define things, especially when we're using these really popular terms that are being widely discussed. So I pulled my definition from the Cleveland Clinic, and imposter syndrome is defined as a psychological phenomenon where individuals persistently feel like frauds, doubting their accomplishments, and fearing exposure despite evidence of their success. And I really like this definition in particular because it's kind of talking about how we feel, but also how that's different from reality or different from the experiences that we've had. I kind of wanted to talk about what is causing imposter syndrome and how many people experience imposter syndrome, because it's actually a lot more than you think. So according to the National Library of Medicine, up to 82% of people experience imposter syndrome. Out of the 82% of people who experience imposter syndrome throughout their career, the highest rates were with ethnic minorities and women. And if we're looking at percentages of individuals in leadership positions, we do see lower percentages of women and of ethnic minorities in leadership. And so I think we do need to consider that there are different external factors impacting different groups of people whenever we look at imposter syndrome. Because as a society, if we've determined that certain people should have certain characteristics or should act in a certain way, there might be a higher chance of imposter syndrome. At the end of the day, I think it's important that we look at how we can address imposter syndrome, however you identify, whoever you are, whatever your experience is. Because if we feel confident, then we're going to be better leaders. I think it's really interesting. All of this data is saying that leaders are experiencing imposter syndrome at some point in their career. That could be one point, that could be multiple points, that could be when they are a leader, it could be as they're working up to try to become a leader. And I think that's really powerful because It reminds me of when I was very early on in my career and I didn't always know what I was doing and I felt very insecure about that. And it goes to show that feeling insecure, feeling imposter syndrome does not mean that you can't advance in your career. It doesn't mean that you can't accomplish your dreams. I want to now look at what are some of the symptoms of imposter syndrome. Now, I'm going to kind of break this down into general symptoms that maybe working professionals identify more with, or if you were a working professional before you were in a leadership position, you identified with, and then symptoms that particularly leaders experience with imposter syndrome or can experience. Some of the more general symptoms are heightened stress responses, particularly around a presentation, evaluations, stepping into a leadership role or taking on more responsibility, over preparation or perfectionism. So think if you have a big meeting coming up, you want to be prepared for any and all questions that could come your way. And then perfectionism is maybe you're receiving really good feedback on your work, but you had a couple of typos. And so you are being really hard on yourself and thinking that you don't deserve these opportunities just because you have a couple of mistakes. And the last one I wanted to talk about is procrastination. I think a lot of times procrastination gets a bad rap. We think of, oh, someone's lazy, someone doesn't want to do the work. But really, procrastination is a part, or it can be a part of your subconscious brain trying to keep you safe. If you have a huge presentation coming up and you know that that could get you the promotion that you've really wanted, which is more responsibility, more pay, potentially longer hours, and you just keep putting off actually making the presentation and you know you're supposed to be doing it, but you just put it off, there could be a part of your brain that doesn't think it's safe to make as much money, doesn't think it's safe to take on more responsibility, potentially is concerned about taking on longer hours with maybe you've just gotten into a relationship or have other commitments. Maybe you have a pet that you want to spend time with and you're worried about working longer hours. Now, working professionals had a couple of key symptoms that I wanted to talk about, and that's discounting achievements and avoiding visibility. Discounting achievements can be maybe you did really well on a project and you say, no, other people helped, my team supported me, it's not a big deal. Or you complete a certification or finish your degree and you say, oh no, it wasn't really that bad. And I would really encourage you to kind of think about moments, particularly I know when I was earlier on in my career, there would be moments where I would achieve something really important and I would say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I would try to downplay it because I wanted to fit in. And that's really not going to help you in your career, particularly if you're trying to look at becoming a leader, because not only is it important that you can speak about yourself in a really good way or you can own your accomplishments, but keep in mind that you will be supporting a team, you will be supporting people, and the last thing you want to do when your team or the people that report to you accomplish something is downplay it, because they've been working really hard and they deserve that credit and you deserve it too. Avoiding visibility is a really interesting one to me because I can think of particular moments in my younger years in my career that I would want an opportunity, but I was really worried about how people would perceive it, to the point that I would maybe apply for something, but I wouldn't tell anybody. And then I would get it, but then there was no one to celebrate with. And I feel like a lot of times I did that because, again, I wanted to kind of fit in. And these are kind of upper limit challenges. If you've never read the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, I highly, highly recommend it. Completely changed my perspective on things. And the book kind of talks about how we can face a challenge of hitting an upper limit. So we accomplish something really great in our life and it doesn't feel safe for some reason. And there's a couple of different reasons why that could not feel safe to your subconscious brain. And one of them kind of talks about a visibility wound of like when people see you, maybe you've had past experiences where, you know, your friends have made fun of you or people have teased you, or some other, you know, memory that kind of made you feel bad for accomplishing something. And this is where like the subconscious brain is really funky because those people probably or hopefully did not mean to make you feel bad. But your subconscious brain, again, is like any sort of change is not safe to your subconscious brain. And so you could be trying to keep yourself smaller or not wanting to draw attention to yourself because it perceived a situation in the past as not safe. Next, I want to talk about our leaders and whether you're a working professional now or you have been before you've stepped into a leadership role. I want you to think about that manager you had that would constantly check in on you, that would ask questions about the progress of work. And it kind of got a little stressful at times because they always wanted an update, but it was just because they knew what they were doing. It was just because they wanted to support you. Well, turns out one of the key symptoms of imposter syndrome in leaders is micromanagement. This completely shifted my perspective of imposter syndrome in leadership because a lot of times we think about how imposter syndrome just impacts us, but when you step into that leadership position, whether it's a formal role or a less formal role, you can really have a very positive or negative impact on the people around you. So not only is micromanagement a symptom, but also overworking to prove your value. So think of the manager who was always the first one in, the last one out. That is a symptom of imposter syndrome. Constantly seeking reassurances from others. So think of the leader who kind of always needed to bounce ideas off of people and would always end up choosing the option that either the team supported or another leader supported over what they might have originally come up with. That could be a symptom of imposter syndrome. And pressure to represent. Now, pressure to represent kind of goes back to some of the data we saw around imposter syndrome, where there were high percentages of both women and ethnic minorities who were experiencing imposter syndrome. And the pressure to represent is when you are part of a community, there is a pressure or can be a pressure that you put on yourself to represent that identity or represent that group. And feeling that external pressure could be a symptom of imposter syndrome. I think it shifts kind of my perspective, and maybe it'll shift yours too, when we think about how our backgrounds can impact how we show up as working professionals and leaders. Because if you feel this strong need to prove yourself because you're the first at something, your subconscious brain may not react positively to that. The reason you probably feel the need to prove yourself is that the subconscious brain is, again, constantly taking in information. And if you're in a room and you don't see anyone like you, you don't have an example of how something went well. So if you are the only woman on a board or the only ethnic minority on a board of a company, your subconscious brain is taking in that information and saying, well, no one else is just like me, so there's no way that we can guarantee that this works out well for us. And that's where you have that push and pull of imposter syndrome, because your conscious brain is aware that, you know, you've had years of experience to get to where you are. You were appointed to a position or you applied to a position and you received it, and you didn't receive that on accident. There is evidence that you received that because you're qualified, because you have the expertise for the position. But your subconscious brain is not thinking that way. And if you're still not convinced that you should be addressing your imposter syndrome, particularly as a leader, I want to talk about the potential impacts on your team, on your company, of you leaving your imposter syndrome unaddressed. Forbes recently came out with an article that will be linked below talking about the impact of imposter syndrome and leaders. I want to talk about some of the key ways teams are impacted. Teams may struggle with autonomy and trust, collaboration can suffer, innovation can stall, and burnout can increase. Now, let's break down why that could potentially happen. If someone is micromanaging, if they're checking in regularly, teams and people are not going to feel as confident that they can do work. So, this can actually spread imposter syndrome. So, how do we address imposter syndrome? Well, the way we address it is addressing, again, that mismatch between the conscious brain that's seeing all of the achievements and the subconscious brain that is seeing lack of safety. The way to ensure that your conscious and subconscious brain are on the same page is you have to reprogram. So, how do we reprogram? There's a couple of ways. One, through affirmations. Two, through exposure and experience. And three, through somatic work. Affirmations are stuff that you want to put in your brain that are positive, but you can't put more in if you're not releasing. So I like to start my day with what's called morning pages. And I challenge myself to do 1 to 3 pages. I tend to do mine in the morning, but you can do it any time. And particularly if you're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety and you feel like imposter syndrome is just constant, it might help you when you have those triggers to just pull out a journal, write a little bit about like what you're feeling. But the reason I tried to push myself to do more pages is that as I start writing, more and more flows out, and you can kind of bridge that conscious subconscious brain. So once you do your kind of journaling and get everything out, I would highly recommend then writing a couple of affirmations. So for example, for me, I grabbed some Post-it notes and I wrote around you are such a great podcaster, or you have a great voice, just things that really help me feel more confident. And if you want to take it a step further, I have what's called the Think Up app. And I write in these affirmations and record it in my own voice, because if you have your subconscious brain hearing you talk about it, it's going to feel a little bit safer. Affirmations are just one way. The second recommendation I have is exposure and experience. So remember, our subconscious brain is constantly taking in information, so you can, through time, kind of shift your perspective. So for example, if you have a day where you have just a really tough meeting and you don't feel like you really presented the best, you can look back and think of all of the times you have presented really, really well. Or you can think about the positive parts of your presentation to kind of help shift your brain. And if that isn't doing it for you, you can always grab a coffee with a friend, with a mentor, and kind of talk through it and tell them, hey, I felt really down about this presentation, and I would really like to kind of pick through and look at some of the positive elements and try to kind of shift my mind so that this doesn't get me down the entire day, because it's one presentation. It's not that big of a deal. And we just have to make sure our subconscious brain knows that. Now, my last recommendation, and my favorite by far, is somatic work. Now, what is somatic work? Somatic work is bringing your conscious and subconscious brain together. And there's a couple of different examples. There's meditation, breath work, and emotional freedom technique, EFT. There's more examples of somatic work, but during this episode, we're going to kind of talk about these three because that's where I've found success. Meditation is super, super powerful. The more you can get into meditation, the more you can activate the brain waves that trigger your subconscious brain. And these are the brain waves that whenever you first wake up in the morning, whenever you're falling asleep, are very, very active. So meditation is really helpful because you calm the body and it can activate those brain waves. I like to do a couple of different meditations. I'm not someone who can just kind of sit in silence. I need someone to walk me through the meditation. And the kind of top ones that I use, I love Brian Scott's Quantum Leap meditation. It's a 10-minute meditation that just kind of helps you visualize what you do want and kind of refocus on what you do want. Joe Dispenza has a lot of really good meditations. There's a morning meditation that I think is about 24 minutes that I really like. And again, it kind of just helps you start your day right. You don't have to do them in the morning. You can do them whenever. But I think it's really helpful to kind of take a step back, because think about all of the momentum that you're building. If you have, a really bad presentation and then you just are frustrated and then you complain about it and then you're super focused on it and then you get completely distracted. You forget the 5 other things you're supposed to be doing that day. Or if you're a leader, you show up to coffee chats, you show up to meetings, and you're not as present. You're not on your A game, and that's going to impact the people you're meeting with. So if you have, something that maybe didn't go well, take a minute, do a little meditation, redirect, and then you have the whole rest of your day to show up on top of it. Breathwork is the next example. I've used the Open app for it. I really like their breath work that they do. It does cost money, but you can go on YouTube and do other forms of breath work for free. I really like it because, again, it kind of helps just recenter you. And it's really easy to just do like a quick 2 to 3 minute breath work video. So it's really friendly in the middle of the day, especially if throughout the day you're experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome. You can just redirect. Now, the last one is by far my favorite, emotional freedom technique, EFT. EFT is really powerful because it uses tapping on pressure points while you say affirmations. And the reason it's powerful is that it is tapping on pressure points that are believed to kind of activate your subconscious brain. I love to do EFT. There's a variety of different videos. I personally have an EFT coach. Shout out to Haley Hoffman-Smith. Absolutely love her. I've had her as a coach for 4 years and completely changed my life. EFT has helped me nearly triple my income. I've met the love of my life. I've lived in dream apartments. I own a house now. I've traveled the world. I've made it to my dream career. Now I'm pursuing this next dream career. It's really changed my life. And EFT is super powerful because think back to kind of the experience and exposure that we've talked about. EFT is a faster way to do that. So instead of over time slowly building a different neural pathway of, say, when you were in middle school, you were not very confident about public speaking and you got super nervous, and during a speech you ran out of the classroom and you were really embarrassed. Kids made fun of you. And now every time that you go up and you try to make a speech or you try to make a presentation, you get those feelings back. You're super nervous. You just want to run away. You want to cry. EFT is really powerful because instead of taking time of slowly presenting more and more and more and more through the years and feeling more confident, you can tap on those memories and rewire your brain. So every time you get in front of people to present, your subconscious brain is no longer going back to that one memory. Now, lastly, I want to talk about how imposter syndrome can actually make you a better leader. And I'm not saying active imposter syndrome because obviously if you're micromanaging your team, if you are working really long hours, that's not good for you. And that's not good as a leader. But the Harvard Business Review published an article that talked about the advantages of imposter syndrome. And the article highlighted that leaders and working professionals who experience imposter syndrome can encourage better listening, connection, and encouragement with others. So if you are a leader or an aspiring leader, having imposter syndrome is not inherently a bad thing. It just means that there is some part of your subconscious and conscious brain that's disconnected and you need to get them on the same page. And I think having imposter syndrome and overcoming it is really powerful because not only as a working professional can you help your colleagues, but as you step up into leadership, or if you are a current leader, you can help other people overcome imposter syndrome. So to summarize today's episode at the head of the table, remember, imposter syndrome is just a disagreement between your conscious and subconscious brain. Being a leader with unaddressed imposter syndrome hurts you and everyone around you. Reprogramming is the key to overcoming imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome can make you become a better leader, but only if you do the things to take care of yourself and overcome it. Thank you so much for joining us this week at the Head of the Table. I really enjoyed talking with you about imposter syndrome and kind of sharing some of my experiences overcoming it. I really hope this episode helped you. Next week at the Head of the Table, we will be discussing stress, how it could be impacting you, those you lead, and overall creating a negative work environment. In these stressful times, it's time we dive in and get some stress relief. If you found the episode today really helpful, please feel free to share it with your friends, your family, your coworkers, your teams, because when we are more confident as people, not only are we going to do better, but our organizations are going to thrive. If you have experienced imposter syndrome before and you want to share your experiences, please feel free to drop them in the comments or share on Instagram or TikTok. Stay tuned for behind the scenes and extra videos that'll be coming through. We also will be starting a LinkedIn page. This is a professional podcast, and I think having a community on LinkedIn where you can join discussion topics, engage with other people, seek mentorship, seek advice is really going to be beneficial. And I think LinkedIn is the perfect place to do it. So thank you so much for listening this week. And fingers crossed the next time we talk, maybe we'll get some fall weather.